I'm so excited to be with you this afternoon on a Sunday, July day here in Minnesota, and super excited for the guest we have today because if you are a parent and you've been working hard to get your kids outside this summer because you've heard that it's important, but maybe you've been challenged with some screen time. I know a lot of parents in the summer, they get maybe a little lax on their screen time routines. We're going to talk about that today with our amazing expert, Stephanie Johnson. So she's an author. We actually have one of her books here is one of our favorites. It's called Baby Bear on developmental milestones. So if you are a parent with an infant or toddler, we're going to be talking to Stephanie more in a couple months on some cool milestone things, but we love the resources she provides. She's an educator, she's a therapist, and she's really overall a specialist at child development. And that's why we love having you on today, Stephanie. Welcome.
Thank you.
Yes, we are excited to be chatting today. As I mentioned, technology can be one of the biggest things that impedes kids' ability to go outside and play. So I want to touch on, for the parents watching today, I want to discuss a little bit about, is technology really that bad? Because I think a lot of parents probably have heard, I need to decrease screen time. But really touching base as to how it does impact their child's brain, and then some things they can actually do about it, because it can be addictive, it can be challenging. So some strategies for them to take home to get their kids off the screens and outside playing. So let's start with that idea of screen time. How impactful is it really? How is it detrimental to development? What have you learned?
Yeah, I think it's very detrimental to development. And today I'd like to just sort of go through some key reasons why and how I'm seeing it show up in my clients that come to see me, my school-age clients. Because it's true, I think the sheer hours that children are in front of the screen, we can all agree is frightening. But then to take it a step further so parents understand why, what is the detriment, what is actually happening in the nervous system, how is this going to affect us later. So I just want to start by talking about something called the sensory motor loop. And so just to describe that, I have the light coming in on me now, I've got some sound of the wind, and I am moving in accordance to the sensory input I'm getting, right? So it's really subtle. A person might move their glasses, they might shift, but it's in balance with the input that they're getting. It's called the sensory motor loop. When the input comes in, I'm going to move a little and put it out. So that's optimal, and that's normal, and you can look anywhere where there's people gathering and you'll see that. We're moving in accordance to what we're taking in. But take watching a television program, and what's happening then to the child is they've got a lot of sensory input coming in through the visual sense and the auditory sense. It's really quick and it's a lot, but their bodies are perfectly still. So we've got an interruption in the sensory motor loop. And so lots of input coming in, more than in the natural environment, lots of input coming in through the eyes and the ears, and the bodies are very still. So now they're not moving in accordance and in relationship to the input coming in. And what we have at the end of the day is sort of this undigested sensory input. It might look like your children running around, you want them to go to bed. They've got a lot of undigested sensory input. So that is sort of one really clear way we can help parents understand, wow, the sensory motor loop is very compromised when we put a lot of sensory input in front of a very still child.
All right, that makes perfect sense. That's fascinating. I love hearing this because it's something I've observed, with working with so many families that we see in our office, and it's nice to get some more background as to why it's happening. When you mentioned glasses, it makes sense because right now, like, I'm always tempted, I want to correct them, and I could see if they were sliding down, and the sensory input's telling my brain, like, do something about it, but if I were locked in a tight jacket or straight jacket and I couldn't do anything, my brain would get overwhelmed until finally, I got to do something. So it's going to come out eventually in a different way.
Another thing that kind of piggybacks on the sensory motor loop is this idea that our nervous systems are experience dependent. So that means that as we're moving through the world, and especially for young children, the nervous system is slowly developing, and it's weaving in all of the experiences that it takes in through the senses. So if you have, again, like some very quick editing, because you know children's programming these days is just bam, 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 really short intervals of content and then advertising. It's very quick. So the nervous system weaves that in. And so it's kind of fast, right? And again, a still child watching it, we don't see it. Now what happens when we take away the fast-moving stimulus, expect the child to be at the library, school, or church, or a waiting room. And now, since the nervous system has acclimated to that frequency and intensity of input, it has to make it, even though the stimulus is no longer in front of them. So that's when we see the little worms, right? Or their teachers are constantly saying, oh, he's so bright, but I just can't get him to sit still, or he can't focus, or she can't find her calm. And so that's something I'm seeing in the practice too, is otherwise pretty typically developing children who can't find their stillness and their focus. And it's a residual effect because the nervous system is so used to that input that without it, it still needs to create it.
That makes perfect sense. We talk a lot with our families that nerves that fire together wire together. So whatever the brain is getting, if it's repeating a certain input into the brain now wires to accommodate for that. Even as probably as a parent watching, if you've experienced certain health scenarios, maybe you drink coffee every morning and you don't have it, your brain's been used to coffee every morning. Now if it doesn't have it, you might go through a withdrawal. Or if you're used to exercising every day and you go a few days without exercise, the brain again isn't getting what it's been used to. So that's really interesting that technology does the same thing. And crazy that it can then impede the classroom piece, even if a kid's doing well otherwise.
Exactly. And I have two more points, and I'd love to chat about ways families can balance playtime and screen time. Because especially as children get older, the battle for no screen time or limiting screen time becomes different than taking the TV or limiting TV with a very young child. That's kind of easy, you can distract them. So speaking of children, I just wanted to talk about this visual development piece. So the organ of the eyeball, right, the thing that looks around and we see and we're taking in the pictures, and the visual processing center in the brain, which is separate, and that's the part that makes sense of the picture. How far away is it? What is actually happening? The texture. It actually sort of detects more about what the organ of the eyeball is doing. They're two separate parts, right? So we've got the eyeball and then the visual processing center of the brain. And those two pieces are not wired up and they're not working as a team, as one unit, until pre-puberty. So we're talking 8, 9, 10, 12. Those two pieces start to really find their groove together and become one cohesive nervous system. And the way they do that is by interacting with the three-dimensional world, right? So all this time before 8, 9, and 10, kids are playing, they're climbing, they're falling down, they're putting things in their mouth, they're rolling down the hill, ideally. And so that's where the hard work of syncing up the eyeball and the visual processing center of the brain happens. And so when we have kids in front of, again, a two-dimensional moving object, or two-dimensional seemingly moving screen, and they're not moving, it really compromises that ocular motor development. And what we know is that a lot of symptoms that we're seeing in terms of behavior and attention and learning can really be sort of traced back to vision. So there's a lot of kids going to get vision therapy for things that kind of, in some respects, could seem more behavioral. So this interweaving of those two parts doesn't even happen until 8, 9, or 10. And so with my families, I really encourage almost zero screen time until they hit that pre-puberty stage. And I still don't love it then, but it's a different, you can limit it, and it's a different kind of potential hazard then.
Crazy. Wow. That's just amazing to think about how our bodies are designed to develop, how our brain's designed to develop. And while technology's been great in many ways, it's like completely contradicted some of that natural development with our modern technology.
Yeah.
And I know as a parent, if you're watching this right now, you think, what? No screen times before 9. What if my kid's 13 and they've had a screen their whole life, or maybe is it too late, or that sounds impossible. So maybe we'll talk about that in a little bit, just to let you know that I think both of us as professionals, we've worked with kids of all ages who didn't have what would be considered the super optimal, but it doesn't mean they're out of luck by any means. Ways to make it in the future. And we'll talk about some strategies you can use in a moment. I know you had one more point that you want to bring up for what's going on.
I have one more point. So this is this is a layered one. So we'll just introduce the first layer right now, and that is, so you'll remember when your baby got startled as an infant and they kind of like go like this. It's a startle reflex, and we call it the Moro reflex when they're infants, and it matures into the adult startle. So it's really easy to remember that when your baby heard a loud noise, they would do that, and then they would cry, and you would go soothe them. But it's interesting to note that it's not just a loud, quick noise. It's a quick change of light that would cause an infant to startle, a quick change in their balance or body position, something tactile they don't care for. So all of that is starting a startle. And so for many of the children that we're seeing that have symptoms of attention deficit disorder or symptoms of sensory integration, anxiety, a lot of them have what we call an outstanding Moro reflex. And that's just kind of a way of saying that reflex didn't really develop the way we would love it to. It's still kind of immature. And a lot of my clients who are also going to see OTs, families might have heard of this language, that we say a retained Moro reflex is some of the language. And the way it gets triggered and the way it stays immature is, again, as you know, exposure to this quick change of light. So all TV programming is really quick changes of light. So what's happening in the low brain where these primitive reflexes are organized is it keeps telling that Moro reflex, stay immature, it's not safe, there's a threat, you can't go on to the next level. And so when I work with families and the Moro reflex is something that we're really targeting, I put in the treatment plan, we're going to have to really cut down the screen time. Otherwise, we work so hard on integrating and maturing and developing this reflex. And then, they go home, and on the way home, they're playing a video game, and it kind of takes us back to square one. So symptoms of the Moro reflex not being mature might be, a child could be really quick to go from 0 to 60, right? Before you know it, they have a really high charge. They might be kind of really sensitive to sensory input. They might be the kid who gets really startled when there's a fire alarm. Be kind of in a constant state of inner stress. We see symptoms of anxiety. So this immature Moro reflex is a culprit for a lot of the symptoms that we're seeing. And it's really tricky to treat it, I'm sure for you too, when children are continuously being exposed to the quick changes of light.
Yeah, I think that's huge to know that it's neurologically what it's doing in the brain. And I know for you too, as well as us, not only the kids that are anxious and maybe ADHD, sensory, but also I know you work with a lot of kids with disorganized brains. So I could see then too, if their brain's never getting a moment to calm and feel grounded, it's not going to do very good at organizing all the inputs coming in throughout the day.
Right, exactly. Okay. And before we go to what can we do, I just want to take a minute to look back at these things that we've talked about so far and point out that I haven't talked about the content of programming or video games or media at all. I've only discussed the damaging impact of the nervous system. So a lot of families think, well, if it's a game about letters, or if it's a learning game, or if it's an educational program. So far, the potential detriment is the same whether it's a show about learning or a show about blowing things up, right? So we haven't talked about content at all, and that can be another interview. I think it's important to note that it doesn't so much matter what the game or the show is about. All of these things are still present.
I think that's huge too, because we see a lot of families where they're on the iPad with an educational game. But I read a study recently that they did that comparison, and they said even kids doing educational programming when they're young, they weren't as developmentally mature and as educated as the parents hoped they would be compared to the kids getting outside and playing. So I think that's a huge point to keep in mind for the parents out there.
Yeah.
So
Go ahead.
Go ahead. So as we're kind of putting things together then, because we do, I think a big theme for both of us is not just saying here's all the negative consequences, but we obviously want to know, so what can we do about it? I definitely am glad we were able to go into those points, because a lot of them I wasn't even realizing. I wanted to take notes during this time, because I think it's so crucial when you know the importance of something, then you're more apt to take action on changing it. So what would you say are some top couple, 2-3 strategies of things parents can be doing now that they know the importance of getting outside and playing versus screen time? What are some ways they can start doing that at home to make the transition easier?
I think the hardest bit is for families whose lifestyle really includes a lot of media time, and it's a really normal part of their life. They might have the TV on all the time while they're cooking, it's just kind of a constant. So I feel like those are the families who are going to have the hardest time approaching, oh, now how do we limit it? So what I tell families is, it's a beautiful gift to be able to say to your children, Mom and Dad just learned this. We had no idea. We just learned that this much is not good for our brains and bodies. So we're just going to work together, and we're going to, change it into game night or go for a walk when we usually turn on our nighttime program. But just kind of outing yourselves and saying, we just didn't know. Now we know, and we're going to try to work together to make some changes. So that's one way to start. The other thing is, it's summer, so this is pretty easy to do. I have a lot of families who ask children to earn their screen time, or sort of buy the screen time with outside time. So if you spend an hour outside climbing trees, smelling dirt, picking grass, rolling up hills, then you earn yourself, and each family has to decide the ratio, but then you earn yourself some screen time. So buying screen time with outside time seems like a nice way to balance it out. Now, if you have older children and teenagers, and you're thinking back, oh my gosh, I mean, they basically were in front of Nickelodeon the whole time. I mean, we really did a lot of educational programming. I had no idea. Believe me, not very many people know of the detriments of screen time yet. So first of all, we're going to liberate yourself from feeling like, oh my goodness, did I do something that I shouldn't have, or did I do something wrong? And then there's just ways where time in nature, walking through the forest, being at the beach, any kind of outside time you can get your teenager to do. And again, it's summer, so there's picnics and it's easy to. But nature has a beautiful way of being sort of it can cleanse the sensory palate. So just like you might have some ginger between dishes, if you're out for dinner, being outside, seeing nature, interacting with it however you do, and it can be really simple. Having dinner outside can help. So I feel like that can be a real normalizer for the nervous system, especially if you have older children who aren't going to go play and climb. They're beyond that. They're not going to do that anymore. Just know that any time in nature can help calm the nervous system from those impacts.
Yeah, and I could see the nature piece too, giving the nervous system a moment of a break to really calm down, and that your children, or myself at times, there's times like I just want to sit inside and veg out in front of the TV, and my wife's like, no, let's go outside, let's go for a walk. And once I get over that hump of getting outside and starting to move, then immediately my nervous system starts to calm down, and I feel the reward or the return on my investment, in a sense, of actually getting outside. So I could see the difficulty is getting them outside, but once they're outside, they get moving, they start playing, then I would imagine their brains just naturally crave it so much that then they start to enjoy it.
I think so. I think it's just the idea of it. I mean, there's that really disturbing quote where someone asked a 4-year-old, well, what do you like about playing inside so much? Well, that's where all the outlets are. But what I've learned is I've worked with families who are very low media, and I've worked with families who are very high media. And what I found is that the low media families report that when they don't get in that habit, again, like that, assimilating to that input, they don't ask for it and crave for it. It's really when the habit is so strong that it's harder to break. So I would encourage families to just sort of pare down little bit by little bit. You might not want to go cold turkey on this unless you're planning like a vacation out to the Boundary Waters. That would be a perfect time to. But a little bit at a time, I think, is good.
Absolutely. And I think that's a great reminder for parents too, is that although it might be difficult right away, each moment the kid gets used to switching to full body movement, playing outside and engaging their brain in a different way, each time they get that, their brain's going to start to become used to that and actually make it easier to do more of it. So it's not like it's going to be this huge battle every single time for the rest of their life, the more they get used to it. Okay.
Yeah, and it might be a little battle at first, but I want to remind parents that when you have a child that doesn't need the media exposure so much, then you also have a child who goes to bed easier. They don't have all that undigested stimulants, right? They're not running around. They're not the kid who needs to be told to sit still all the time. You will see so many benefits when you start to work on the process that it really is worth that hump of getting over this idea of, limiting it.
Mm-hmm. That's one thing my wife and I talk a lot about is in life in general, you can take a hard, easy approach or an easy, hard approach. And it's easy to do the easy, hard approach. And so what that means is it's very easy to let your child be on his iPad or play video games longer, but then it becomes hard because you have to spend an hour getting them down to bed at night, or they're having lots more aggression or behaviors or meltdowns that become hard to deal with. So if you flip that around, you could say, well, I'm going to go with the hard approach up front, break the screen time, make the rest of my day and my week, my month, my child's life easier.
Yeah, exactly. Good point.
Yeah. So as we're coming to kind of wrapping up today's conversation, any other last sort of overview or ideas that you have for parents, whether it's getting started or any other last reminders you want to give them?
I think there's only one thing that comes to mind because it's really easy. So if it's time for media and the children are going to do it, and that's just what's going to happen, touch your children as much as possible while they're watching it. Bring them back into their body. Give them a hug. Have a little wrestling break at commercials. And then lastly, have everybody periodically, maybe at commercials is a good time, cup their eyes real nice and tight so they get complete blackness for a while. Because that really restores and resets that ocular piece that we were talking about. And it's really nurturing for the organ of the eyeball to just have a blackout break after all of that input. So those are two things you can do if there is going to be viewing, and you can kind of minimize some impact that way.
I love that, because to be realistic, we know that screens aren't going away. They're not becoming less popular. Your job as a parent to limit screen time is not going to become any easier. So it's going to be part of life. So I think those are tips. And I love the touching, because I think that could also be really good for transitions. If you say you have 5 more minutes on your iPad, then we're going to get ready for dinner or ready for bed, that as that time's ending, I could imagine you do some body massage, some touching, because then their brain's waking up to the rest of the world, so they don't just have to go cold turkey.
Three-dimensional world. This is what actually it really does help with transition. That's a great point. It just brings them back into their body so that they can have an easier time with turning it off.
Awesome. Well, this has been wonderful, Stephanie. With our conversation today, I'm super excited to be able to have you on again in a couple months. We'll be talking more about different milestones and other huge awarenesses that I think you provide for parents and families, of just some common things that we might have taken as normal, but actually could be affecting development. If a family is looking to get a hold of you for more information, whether it's a book or consults, what are some ways families work with you, and how can they best get a hold of you?
Yep. So if you are a parent of an older child looking for some resources there, you would go to sageeducationcenter.com, and we'll have that in the comments, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
And if you're looking for a book, the book is about infants. It makes a great shower gift. If you know someone having a baby, it's a great gift. Or if you just had a baby, pick one up for yourself. And that you can go to babybear.net. So there's two different resources.
We recommend that. It is a great gift. It's a wonderful how-to manual for a new parent looking for the brain development like we've been talking about. So we'll put that link in as well. Okay. And then if you have questions or want to reach out to you directly, what do you recommend there?
There's a contact form on the websites, and that's kind of the quickest way to get to me. Just shoot me an email, and I can get back right away with those.
Sounds great. And we will too in the comments section. If you guys are out there and you're watching this and you have questions that come up, feel free to put them in the comments section, and then we'll do the best we can too to get back to you and answer any questions you do have.
Sounds great.
All right. Well, it's been so great to have you today, Stephanie. I appreciate your time. I know you're busy with all you do and your 9-year-old at home, so it's nice to take a moment to be able to pick your brain and share your wonderful insights to all the parents out there. So it's much appreciated.
It was a blast. I had fun.
Great. We'll talk to you later. Bye, guys.